going to talk about hope. It's Remembrance Sunday, and so I thought, let's talk about hope. What better day to do it? And I want to acknowledge from the outset that when we talk about hope, we talk about suffering. And so I just want to say at the beginning, do whatever you need to do this morning to take care of yourself in this space. There are people who will pray with you. There's space at the back to wander around. There is fresh air outside. Please take whatever it is that you need this morning to help you encounter Jesus and look after yourself. I have just come back from a week of residential training doing sacramental theology, which is very final year, very demure. And I heard a story which I really wanted to squeeze into my talk. So we're going to open with the story, and then there's a tenuous link. So this phenomenal story about a vicar who was newly ordained and was headed out to one of his first funerals and burials. And just like in the movies, it was pouring with rain, torrential sheets of rain, and this newly ordained minister was standing at the graveside surrounded by the friends and family of the dearly departed, and he reaches out as he prays. But he reaches a little bit too far over the grave, and the torrential rain has weakened the soil that he stands on, and he falls head over heels, face first, into the grave atop the casket. And you can picture it. It doesn't sound like anything that should ever happen, but it did. It happened to this guy early on in his ministry, and it's horrendous. Imagine trying to come back from that. Imagine trying to then climb out of said grave. Well, there's mud everywhere. People are grieving, but also laughing because it's a bit awkward, isn't it? It's not very British. It's not very good. Terrible, terrible situation. But anyway, he's a bishop now. The only way is up. So there's that. So that's good. He's a bishop now. It was all right in the end. Here comes the tenuous link to the fun story. Unlike the accidentally slippery vicar, God intentionally seeks us out in our grave. In our deepest, darkest heartbreak and struggle, he sits there with us. He is not British about it. He doesn't try and escape the discomfort at the first opportunity. He doesn't make a cup of tea and hope that that's going to make it all okay. He doesn't squash it down inside until it goes away. God seeks you out and he sits with you. And the Bible has loads to say about suffering and about the hope that we can find in it. The book of Revelation is the last book in the Bible. And in it we see these pictures. This man called John, the author, has a vision of the end of days and of heaven. And in chapter 6, he describes the Lamb, who is Jesus, opening these sealed scrolls to reveal the nature of suffering. And this is where we join in the story. So Revelation chapter 6 says this: I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. We're not doing 7, don't worry. I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a loud voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as conqueror bent on conquest. When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill one another. To him was given a large sword. When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures say, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine. I'll explain that, don't worry. When the Lamb opened the 4th seal, I heard a voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over 1/4 of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Now, when I hear this passage, I think, never mind the end of days. We don't have to look very far around our world today to see some of the stuff these horsemen bring with them. The white horse looks victorious. Its rider wears a crown and holds a bow, but it's deceit. This horse represents power that deliberately misleads. The red horse symbolizes conflict and war, and he takes peace from the earth. The black horse represents economic hardship and scarcity, a familiar story in our world. And the pale horse is death itself. All of the horsemen have been given some authority. And the first wears a crown. But there are two words for crown in Revelation. The first is a crown of royalty. And this is what the first horseman wears, a crown of royalty, a crown of the prince of darkness. But this pales into insignificance when you learn what the second word for crown points to, because the second word that is used for crown is the victor's crown. The horsemen may be powerful, but it is a finite power that they carry, and it cannot stand against the one who wears the victor's crown. These guys can't even touch Jesus, and he knows it. Jesus himself says that in this world you will have trouble. John 16:33. You will have trouble, thanks to those loser horsemen who are wreaking havoc all over the place. But take heart, I have overcome the world. The world where powers of darkness run riot. But here's the thing, they can only do so for a time. Suffering, your days are numbered, because Jesus says that I have overcome the world. I have overcome the darkness. I have overcome death. I have overcome injustice. And it is precisely because he has overcome the world that we can have our hope in him. In all our days, in every season, and under any authority, we can have hope in Jesus. Gareth and I share a love of the band The Porter's Gate. Any other Porter's Gate fans in the room? Joe Hobbs, welcome to the group. Lovely. Do look them up, they're amazing. And so Porter's Gate recently released an album about Christian faith and mental health. And there's one song in particular that I find really immeasurably powerful in this conversation of hope. And it's inspired by this sculpture. This is Christ of the Abyss. It's a 9-foot bronze sculpture of Jesus with his arms raised upwards, and it is sunk deep into the Mediterranean Sea. John Swinton, the theologian who helps these guys think through some of this stuff, talks about the thinking behind this particular song. He says, when we think about God, we tend to look upwards. As we raise our hands and reach up to God, we find the source of our redemption. When things are going badly, we sometimes tumble downwards, crashing into the abyss of darkness. But this image reminds us that however far we fall, however dark the world becomes, however close we come to giving up, when we arrive at that place of darkness and suffering, Christ awaits us. When you hit the bottom of the deep, dark ocean, Jesus is already there, arms outstretched to bring comfort and healing. There is no darkness that Jesus has not endured himself or defeated. There is no suffering that Jesus does not meet us in. And when we believe this, the goal ceases to be to try and live a life that avoids suffering, because we can't do that anyway. But instead, we allow ourselves to seek God in the middle of it. How do we do that? How do we seek God in the middle of our darkness? Well, it can be really hard. It can be really hard to seek God in the middle of your suffering because it requires honesty. It requires us to choose to be wholly and completely honest, firstly with ourselves about where we're at and what we're feeling, but secondly, to be wholly honest before God. And it doesn't make sense that that would be hard because God already knows. We're not filling him in on stuff when we come to be honest. He already knows where you're at. But there is something about the humility it takes to name the pain that we are in. There is something about the humility it takes to name the pain that we are in. In year 4, so I guess I was around 8 years old and a little bit shorter, although I was the tallest in the class for a long time, I wrote a note to Aaron Takas, who none of you know, but he was the captain of the playground football team, saying, "I fancy you. Love from Hannah." I'm not Hannah. Hannah was the prettiest girl in the class, and I thought that was absolutely hilarious, that she was confessing love to Aaron Takas, and I put it in his drawer, because you know you all have the little drawers. I slotted it in, and I thought it was brilliant. But it turns out Hannah did not think that this was brilliant. And I recall our teacher, Mrs. Coates, Chris Coates, stood up at the beginning of the lesson and said that Hannah was very upset by this incident. And I quote, "I know whose handwriting this is. If you don't confess by break time, I will find you." Needless to say, I spent the rest of the lesson under an astonishing weight of guilt before confessing my sins at break time to a teacher who already knew it was me. God already knows. He is unchanging, and he does not change when we bring ourselves to him, but it changes us. Because when you are in the depths of suffering, all you've got to give is honesty. And in return, God gives you hope. When you don't know what words to pray and all you can find are tears and groans, that's what honesty looks like in that moment. And as ever, I think the Bible will probably explain this better than I am. So in John chapter 11, we read the story of Lazarus. Lazarus is Jesus' friend, and he is sick, and he's not getting better. And his sister Martha sends word to Jesus that his friend is dying and they need him to come and heal him. She sends word and she waits. And she waits. And she waits. Jesus hasn't come yet, and all of a sudden it's too late. 4 days later, Jesus arrives. And Martha says this in verse 21, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Where were you, Jesus? Where were you when we needed you? But I don't think this is a question that Martha asks in doubt, because I don't think you ask, "Where were you, Jesus?" if you don't believe that he is capable of miracles. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have lived. Lord, I know who you are, and I know you can heal." And in a funny, backwards way, this conversation is exactly a picture of what honesty before God and hope in Jesus looks like. Martha's circumstances plunge her into those deep depths of darkness, but her hope is not moved because she knows who her Lord is. She knows that things will not always be this way. And like Martha, we can endure with hope because our God has promised to make all things right. You don't have to fix it all. You don't have to get back to being okay in order to encounter joy again. You don't have to censor your prayers before a God that already knows, and you certainly don't have to enjoy suffering. You just have to show up. You have to show up as you are and let him be your hope. At the end of the book of Revelation, the end of the Bible, we get to see a glimpse of where we're headed when we put our hope in Jesus. So I'm going to end with this incredible picture of promise and beauty, and then we're going to spend some time in prayer. So Revelation chapter 21. "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any chaos. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, no more mourning, no more crying, no more pain. For the older order of things has passed away. He who is seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Amen.